Cool. Why don't we get started? And if more folks trickle in, then great. So, GM everybody, we'll walk through a couple updates on my end. So, yesterday we shared the first temp check proposal, for which we hope to gather some feedback from the DAO on what the unripe seed value should be set to. So, there was a lot of discussion started, many months ago, probably 6+ months ago at this point, around making the unripe seed rewards, for depositing unripe assets in the silo rather, equal in order to further incentivize conversions from the unripe LP token to unripe beans in order to arbitrage the bean price. And we wanted to get some more formal feedback from the DAO in the form of a snapshot proposal using stock rather than a simple Discord emoji straw poll. And so the plan is to have this take course over the next couple weeks. So we'll propose this one hopefully tomorrow or later this week. And this will just be simply to vote for or against whether the unripe seed values should be set to be equal. Hey, Joe. And after that, assuming that the DAO express interest in setting the unripe seeds to be the same, we will propose a follow-up proposal with a variety of choices as to what the seed values should actually be set to. Whether that's, the voting choices will probably look something like, 0 seeds, 0.51, 1.52, or something to that effect. And if you have any feedback on what those voting choices should look like, please feel free to drop them in the temp check channel that we opened yesterday. And otherwise, just great to see a lot of community discussion around this. I think that this is what it's all about in that regard. And on a related note, Bacchus had done a lot of great work on this article summarizing what the gauge system is and how it potentially might work. And this is sort of relevant to the discussion around, the DAO having to manually vote on what these seeds per BDV rewards should be set to, but hopefully there's an autonomous system to replace that in the future. So if you check out the media channel in Discord, there is a link to that article that I would check out. And, if new folks join Discord and are asking about what the gauge system is, feel free to direct them in that direction. Otherwise, so all of these unripe seed votes are an input to what should be proposed in Silo v3. And at this point, we sort of realized that Silo v3 really is a significant upgrade. And so that will involve a lot of migration of balances similar to how the replant worked. So we are hoping to work on and finalize the Silo v3 UI sooner rather than later so that we can have potentially community members as well who are, have a little bit of command line experience testing the UI against a local fork, which we did probably 1 to 2 full weeks of before replant. So I think that exercise at the time was very fruitful, and that is something we are trying to do as well. And so that for Silo v3, that's likely to push back the timeline for that like 1 to 2 weeks. But as far as the overall Mayflower goes, Silo v3 and the well stuff are sort of happening in parallel. So don't think that pushing back Silo v3 should significantly change or have a significant effect on when the Bean ETH well ends up being whitelisted. A couple other quick things I wanted to note. As far as delegates go, I just wanted to say that Rex and Safi are class acts, but think it would be really awesome to see a larger variety of folks applying to be delegates. So just a heads up that those applications are in delegates channel, and feel free to fill that out anytime. And then lastly, we rescheduled the scribe meetings to right after the DAO meetings at the top of the hour. So that would be 11 a.m. Pacific. I think that's most of the updates from my end. Why don't we move over to Red Beans, in case you have anything you wanted to share on the UI front?
Hey, Guy. Yeah, I'll be brief, but happy to give an update. So as far as the base in UX, working on UI components with the creative direction that I spoke about last week. Huge shout out to Albin, who's been crushing it on this front and has been shipping code very quickly. So, we're making some adjustments on the fly here, and some of the existing UI components we're shifting around to make them feel better and sort of represent the concepts better. So we are actually getting pretty close here. Have a couple more components to finalize, but the basis for the site is there. And we're starting to think through some of the animations, which is exciting and I think will be a lot of fun. And so that's it on the base and UX. I guess on the rest of Beanstalk, we're thinking through sort of the deposit token art for the ERC 1155s that will be a part of the Silo v3 upgrade. More to come on that. And then lastly, we're beginning to sort of explore some iconography for stock and seed. I think that, we've sort of been using the stock and seed that's in the UI for a while now. And we're just starting to explore some new visual directions for those. So any updates that happen there, we'll be sure to share and incorporate some community feedback, because I think that's important. But just starting to think about that and speaking with a couple of visual designers on that front. So that's it from me on my end of things.
Awesome. Thanks, Red Beans. I think it would be cool. I mean, I don't know if you thought about this in the context of, surprising people versus not, but maybe it would be cool at some point to give a little demo of some of the designs to the DAO in one of these next DAO meetings.
Are you talking about the base and UX?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we'd love to. Give us like another week or two, because I think the site will actually be in a good spot to demo the site, as opposed to some of the prototypes I've built in Figma. But excited to do so. I think that would be great to do in a DAO meeting.
Agreed. Hey Chad, are you at a mic?
I am. How are we doing, guys?
Doing all right. Anything you want to share on the engineering front?
Nothing in particular. I mean, I think, we're just kind of steaming forward on all fronts at this point. I want to give a shout out to the Basin UX and UI team. I've been seeing some of the progress there. So it's really, really looking awesome at this stage, and super excited to get all of that pushed. Sort of on my plate, right now, my main focus beyond just continuing to review the BIP code that's coming out over the next month or so with Silo v3 is working on the Silo v3 user interface. So hoping to have some sort of test net that we could share around in the next couple of weeks. So some of the details on that project are a little bit early at this stage, but one thing to possibly look forward to is something that we can all play with in the next couple of weeks. So stay tuned and feel free to DM me with any questions. But beyond that, just kind of all moving forward.
Can you talk about the dynamics of the migration, wherein Beanstalk Farms may be paying for some portion of farmers to migrate and other farmers may pay themselves, and what that will look like?
Yeah, I don't know if we have Pizza Man or it looks like we have both Pizza Man and Brain with us. Maybe one of you guys want to speak to that point specifically, since I know you've been working on it.
Sure, yeah, I could probably speak to that. So initially, when gas was cheap, like around 15 to 20 gwei, we were calculating how much it would cost for Beanstalk Farms to migrate everyone. And basically at that time it was going to be something around, I think it was maybe $30,000 to $40,000. So it was a serious consideration. But then when we started looking into the details of how that would actually work, it was going to take up something like, I don't know, maybe 15 to 20 blocks of like Ethereum block space. And if Ethereum has a totally full block, then the gas in the next block will go up by 12.5%. And also, you're outbidding everyone else who's trying to get a transaction in, which means that the gas price is basically going to shoot way up. So also now taking into the fact that gas is consistently over 100, it looks unlikely that we'll be able to actually pay to migrate everyone. So we're going to have to fall back to the original option, which was basically the first time you want to interact with the silo after the silo v3 is deployed, you just have to migrate basically from the old silo to the new silo, and then you can do everything like usual after that. So the cost for that, varies heavily depending on what the current gas price is. The most expensive one to migrate will be the root token. But for the average user, I think it'll be maybe, I don't know, maybe $20 to $40 or something, depending on what the gas price will be. Hopefully we'll see prices come down, and so it'll be cheaper for everyone. But yeah, in the end, everyone will basically be responsible for migrating themselves. And yeah, if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
And are there any implications to someone not migrating for an extended period of time? In order to interact with the silo, do you need to migrate first?
Yeah, good question. So if you want to do anything with the silo, including just a regular mow or a convert or withdraw your tokens or anything really, then you do need to migrate in order to do that. If you don't migrate, you will still keep earning the stock that you would have at whatever the current amount of seeds is for whatever tokens you hold. So there's not really any cost to not migrating, because basically the way that it works is all of your old deposits need to be removed from the old silo system and be deposited into the new silo v3 system, which is based on a grown stock per BDV index. So basically, before, with seeds being static, we couldn't support any change in the seeds value, because it would mess up like how much stock would be removed from the system when you tried to convert or withdraw your deposit. So that's why we're migrating to the system that's based on kind of an index. And so every single token will have its on how much stock has been grown per BDV of value that is deposited by that token in your deposits. And so that means that basically, even if the seeds value changed every single season, the system can calculate properly how much grown stock you have, no matter how many seasons have passed since then. So that means that when the migration happens, even if you don't migrate right away, basically when you do end up migrating, the system will calculate how much stock you earned up until the migration, and it'll award you that, and then it'll also award you whatever the amount of stock has grown for each of your deposits since the migration as well, even taking into account the possible dynamic seed changes.
Very helpful. Thanks for the overview. And what else will happen upon that migration? I know one of them is minting the 1155 deposit tokens to the farmer's wallet. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, that was more of something that Breen worked on. Maybe he wants to speak to that.
Yes. So upon migration, it will emit the associated 1155 event needed for all the indexers to figure out that you own the deposit. So after migration, you should be able to see on Etherscan or any other block explorer your 1155 deposit in all of them.
Very nice.
And then
We were
of
doing
course,
some.
apologies.
Go ahead.
You'll be able to do all the ERC 1155 functionalities, such as transferring, listening to OpenSea, all that good jazz.
Amazing. Thanks for the summary. All right. Maybe we can check in with Publius to see if they're. I just lost him. Well, let's see if they come back. But if not, I was just going to say that some of the. Hey, Publius. I was just going to ask if there's anything you guys wanted to share at the DAO meeting today. Maybe particularly related to the conversation you brought up last week about revitalized grown stock and how some of the decisions around unripe seeds might affect that. If you're out of mic. All right, was going to give him a sec, but perhaps not. But basically, the long and short of it is for those who were at the DAO meeting last week, Publius brought up this discussion around potentially this method around reducing the amount of revitalized grown stock that Unripe holders earn like post replant and having that be decreased. But basically the TLDR is that development would not need to take place if the DAO ends up selecting 0 seeds per BDV for the unripe seed rewards. So as far as like development wise, we are planning on tabling that one until we see what the DAO ends up expressing interest in as far as what those unripe seeds values should be. But if they end up back on the call, we'll give them the opportunity to speak. But otherwise, I think that covers it on the Beanstalk Farms end. I see some folks, some of the guys from Scribe are here. Not sure if you guys had anything you wanted to share in particular in advance of our meeting later or at the top of the hour.
No, I didn't have anything. Everything can wait till then.
Cool. All right, well then just leave the floor open for a minute, see if there's things that folks want to bring up, talk about, ask questions, etc.
Here's on how much seeds, like the values of seeds should be for unripe beans and LP. I know some people are for 0, some people for 1. Would like to hear opinions if they have any strong opinions here.
Yeah, totally game to have that discussion. I mean, on my end, just like from a practical economic perspective, there's seems to be no benefit to Beanstalk rewarding unripe holders with additional stock in order to get them to hold the deposit in the silo, given that the unripe assets can't be dumped. They can be chopped, however. Then there's the question of like, is chopping really a bad thing? In a lot of ways, it seems like a benefit to Beanstalk to, pay someone some minimal amount to exit the system, and then the sum of its, obligations to unripe holders decreases, the amount of fertilizer that needs to be sold decreases, and yeah, just generally thinking that, Beanstalk should try to reward grown stock to assets that it actually wants people to retain in the silo versus not. Then, of course, there's the practical question of what stockholders would vote for, given that most stockholders are unripe holders at the moment, which is a point that Sync brought up in the channel. And to me, that's sort of the purpose of this whole temp check exercise. Is we'll see how the next vote goes as far as what people are willing to vote for or not.
Yeah, like from my perspective, it's a little bit of the tragedy of commons, right? Like I guess the benefit of the unripe holder is not not 100% aligned with what's best for the protocol, right? We unripe holders would like higher stock per BDV, but for the health of the protocol, probably best to lower, take an altruistic stance and lower the seeds per BDV on our given asset, right? From my perspective, once the gauge system, is implemented and deployed, it's probably a good assumption that the stockholders will probably vote for ripe assets rather than unripe. So, whether or not we do it here, I feel like in the future it's going to decrease anyways, just because of the autonomous nature of the gauge system. So,
Totally. I mean, given all the discussions happened over the last 6 months in favor of making the unripe seeds the change in this way, as far as just them being equal, unclear on what they'll be set to ultimately, but on some level, if this were all autonomous already, like perhaps the unripe seeds would have already been made equal programmatically. So agree with you there. Anyone else have any other input on unripe seed parity, what the seeds per BDV rewards should be set to, etc.?
Has there been any discussion around what the Bean ETH well seed amount? Because if the DAO decides to make that something higher, like 5 or 6 or 8 seeds, then that could also, the relative value could affect what the DAO votes to set the unripe seeds value to.
That's interesting. I mean, to me, that was up next, but yeah, hard to, unless it's chosen to be 0. I agree that, it is all relative to some extent. So I don't have a good answer for you there. This is sort of like the tough balance of making these changes manually, right? And part of the reason we're doing this like multiple stage process, where like multi-vote process. So you'd imagine if you were to, set the voting choices for just do one vote and say, all right, let's set the unripe seeds to and have the voting choices be like 0, 1, 2, and greater than 2. Well, if greater than 2 is the winner, then it's like, you have to have some sort of vote, but what if any individual number within the range of greater than 2 is less than some other value people vote for? So it gets really kind of messy whenever you're like dealing with multiple variables. But yeah, hard to disagree that it does sort of matter. Don't know what the solution is in practice though. Also, personally, haven't thought much about what the bean ETH reward should be.
I think I would vote for making the bean ETH reward be higher than the bean 3 curve pool, because ETH is decentralized, and also the volatility kind of adds a little bit of arbitrage opportunity to bring bean back to peg, and so I think that opens up some possibilities. So incentivizing that a little bit more than just the stables could be beneficial for bean overall, but curious to hear what other people think.
Well, if the DAO decides like 4 versus 5, would that affect your decision around the unripe seed rewards?
Personally, no. I would still vote for unripe seed rewards to drop to 0, because I think, looking at my own unripe holdings, mostly in 3 curve, it's grown approximately 75% stock, as if I had, for example, deposited that same amount of unripe just out of the blue, if that makes sense. So that means that I'm getting 75% of the initial kind of benefit that I got from depositing that amount in the silo way back before the exploit, which is pretty high considering that it's only been 22% recapitalized, and also it costs me basically nothing to keep it in there, because the only thing that I could get from pulling it out would be the 0.5% chop rate. So for those reasons, it seems like I have kind of an unfair advantage of holding unripe versus people who are depositing real liquid assets into the silo. So the more unripe holders have stock, the less incentive there is for real new assets to enter the system. So for that reason, I would argue that unripe should be 0. But still, regardless, I would hope also that the bean ETH well would be incentivized a little bit more heavily, so that we would weigh more towards the decentralization aspect and also ETH is the most liquid token on the Ethereum network, so that also has benefits as well.
There, guys. Yeah, I would just add, unlike when Beanstalk launched in 2021, the merge has happened and withdrawals are in effect now. So that was a big, item that was checked off the Ethereum roadmap, and we're competing against the staking rate, which is I would call that the quote unquote risk-free rate on Ethereum, right? So if you hold Ether right now, you can just go to like Stakewise, for example. They're not that big as Rocket Pool or Lido, but the APR is 8%. Everybody's seen the gas prices over the past few weeks. So the Bean ETH pool is going to be competing against the quote unquote risk-free rate on Ethereum, which is the staking rate. And so we have to I would say we'd have to consider that. The DAO would have to consider that as far as how the Bean ETH well is going to be allocated stock and seeds. And I would also bring up that Mr. Mochi had some comments in the discussion about the temperature check. regarding, governance concerns. If a new, large stakeholder were to come in and make a significant deposit to the silo, there's roughly 100 million stock as it stands right now, based off of the majority of which is owned by Unripe asset holders. So I, just looking at his math, I think he said, somebody came in with a 25 million deposit, they would be able to accrue 100 million stock within 10,000 seasons, roughly, which is just over a year. The comment I would have to that is, quite frankly, I don't think Beanstalk would have I don't think the concern for Beanstalk is new deposits of that size coming in at this point. I think if anything, that would be beneficial, and the flywheel will kind of, take it from there. But something to consider is, from a governance standpoint, if there is a concern that, new large depositors were to come in and kind of, flip the switch on a lot of what has been established about the protocol, we might want to consider some sort of time lock mechanism in the governance apparatus. So new depositors wouldn't necessarily have the full effect of their governance power right away. That might address some of the concerns, especially for unripe asset holders who, if we do go with 0 seeds, they may be concerned that, well, their governance power will be diluted very rapidly in a situation where, Beanstalk kind of takes off. So just some things to consider.
Yeah, I agree with you in the sense of like to the earlier point you were making around a large deposit. Just think Beanstalk in practice ends up very cyclical, so sort of like deposits beget more deposits. But yeah, it's an interesting point they bring up as well. And yeah, as far as time locking stock, I mean, I feel like that's got to happen for at least one block, right? Well, we learned our painful lesson last year. But yeah, I think that's a very reasonable idea. I mean, as far as takeovers go, it's hard to imagine that being a meaningful attack vector before there's some re-implementation of on-chain governance, but I think that sounds like a reasonable addition.
Just want to know with the time lock idea that, if a user really wanted to take over in that manner, they could do it with deposits as well, like just purchasing older deposits. So that's another edge case to consider.
You're talking about on a market?
Yes.
Like buying people's deposits?
Yeah.
I think buying.
I guess I'm sort of thinking about the future state where like stock is already liquid. I guess it's sort of unclear at that point. Like if you're trading deposits, whether it comes with the stock, whether it doesn't come with the stock. Yeah, all that's very, very gray at the moment.
Yeah, just to kind of get everybody's thoughts on this, maybe for a future DAO call, future discussions, I'm just going to share a post that Vitalik wrote back in 2019 on your chat. So it's probably a good something to consider on this governance question. But again, we could probably revisit this as things get more clear about how beneath well, etc., will be allotted seeds, etc.
Thanks for sharing. We'll check it out.
I think the case where a large depositor comes in with, say 25 million beans and deposits them into the silo, the only way they could acquire those is, if they bought them up on the market, which would definitely drive up the delta B really high. And in the process of doing that, a lot more beans would get printed, majority of which would go to the existing unripe holders. So I think it would be quite difficult to come in and, take over bean that way, as far as acquiring more stock from the unripe. The cheaper way to acquire stock now is just to buy those deposits that are going for approximately 8% of the unripe value, assuming that they had fully become ripe. So that's a really inexpensive way right now to buy stock. So that's probably a higher chance that you could take over Beanstalk by acquiring a bunch of unripe now rather than a new deposit.
Anyone else have any input, questions? Also, feel free to drop it in the Barnyard chat if you're not at a mic. Going once? All right, let's call it there. Thanks everyone for coming and participating in the discussion. We'll see you next week.